It was a whisper, buried deep in the palace corridors, a private promise made by a dying monarch that would shake the very soul of the House of Windsor. Princess Anne, known for her unshakable loyalty and silence, finally steps into the spotlight with a revelation that strikes at the monarchy's hidden heart. Queen Elizabeth's most sacred heirlooms were promised to Catherine, without warning, without protocol, and without Camilla's knowledge. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The revelation was not delivered on a grand stage, but in a hushed exchange during a closed-door Clarion Council meeting, one that was never supposed to reach the outside world. Yet somehow, word seeped through. Anne, the Queen's only daughter and most stoic defender of protocol, stood before her stunned peers and uttered what no one expected, that Elizabeth had made a private decision before her death, one that bypassed formal channels, traditional succession, and decades of precedent. She had chosen Catherine as the sole recipient of her most personal heirlooms, bypassing Camilla entirely. The air in the chamber shifted as those words landed, not with ceremony, but with quiet devastation. In the wake of Anne's admission, rumours began circling like vultures over a wounded crown. Some whispered of a sealed envelope, signed by Queen Elizabeth herself just weeks before her health declined beyond return. Aides who had served the Queen for decades claimed no knowledge of it. Others insisted they'd seen glimpses of such a document locked in the personal safe at Balmoral, marked not with the royal crest but with the Queen's private cipher, known only to her closest family. What was inside, and why had it remained hidden? These questions multiplied, but Anne refused to elaborate beyond her initial statement, letting the weight of her truth speak louder than palace denials ever could. Within hours, tensions ignited behind palace gates. The implications were explosive. If the heirlooms believed to include the Queen's sapphire clasp and Queen Victoria's mourning locket had been promised to Catherine, in secret, what else had been discussed in the final days of Elizabeth's life? Was there a plan unspoken, a silent shift in power foretold by a dying matriarch? The royal households, already fractured by private grief and public pressure, now found themselves on the edge of open confrontation. And it wasn't just whispers in corridors anymore, it was documents being requested, security logs being reviewed, and vault access being denied. Some senior aides, long thought to be in the Queen's confidence, found themselves scrambling to respond. They had no answers. Their silence only fanned the flames of suspicion. Who was present when the promise was made? Did anyone witness it? Or was this a pact forged only between mother and daughter, one royal, one common-born, sealed not in ink, but in trust? Every unanswered question cast new shadows, and every shadow fell upon Catherine, who had neither confirmed nor denied anything. And in that vacuum, the speculation flourished. But beneath the frenzy, the timeline itself became the most troubling element. When did the Queen make her decision? Was it before Charles was crowned? Before Camilla's new status was formalized? Had this royal promise been the Queen's final correction, a silent rebalancing of power before she left the world? With every angle examined and still no clarity, palace insiders began to wonder, had Queen Elizabeth known something the rest of them didn't? Had she seen, in Catherine, a guardian for the legacy that she couldn't entrust to anyone else? But what Anne disclosed next didn't just confirm a secret, it unveiled the Queen's long-hidden fears and her unspoken trust in Catherine over others. Hidden inside a velvet pouch marked Windsor, personal, a handwritten note sealed with the Queen's private wax emblem has emerged, one that was never logged by official record keepers. Its existence was denied for years. Now Anne confirms it. Her mother wrote it for Catherine. The silence surrounding that velvet pouch had grown louder with every passing year. Tucked away in the Queen's private drawer, it was protected not by guards, but by secrecy. Anne now reveals that 2 months before Queen Elizabeth's passing, in a moment suspended between duty and mortality, the monarch personally handed her the envelope in Balmoral's Blue Room. No aides present, no protocol followed, just a mother passing on something that could no longer wait. Anne says her mother looked her in the eye and said, "When the time comes, you'll know who it's for." She never said the name. She didn't have to. Anne knew. Inside the letter, written in the Queen's unmistakable hand, was a cryptic yet piercing line to the Keeper of Endurance. It was not a royal title. It was not a name found in any official document or family tree. But Anne understood. The phrase had been used by the Queen only once before in a private conversation after the death of Prince Philip. She had told Anne that while many endure, few can carry others through it. And in those words, Anne saw her mother's vision take shape. Catherine was not just enduring. She was meant to protect the legacy, even when the throne turned cold and trust ran thin. The Queen had left behind more than jewelry. She had left behind an unspoken guardianship, entrusted to a woman who never sought power, but carried it with grace. What shocked Anne most was the symbolism, but the specificity. The note mentioned heirlooms by name: Elizabeth's sapphire clasp, Queen Mary's pearl veil pin, and Queen Victoria's mourning locket, described as items meant to safeguard what I could not say aloud. Those words carried the weight of everything the Queen had feared. Might be lost the soul of the monarchy, the values unspoken, the continuity of grace over dominance. These heirlooms were never meant for ceremony. They were meant for silent strength, a private armor to be worn not in power, but in principle. And she wanted Catherine to wear it. Now claims that the Queen had already prepared for the transfer of these items. The royal safekeepers at Balmoral had been discreetly instructed. A small team of only 3 was aware, each bound by private oath, not official duty. When the Queen passed, the items had already been moved to a secured vault, inaccessible even to senior royal staff. No documents filed, no inventory released. This wasn't just a gift, it was a buried command hidden from the monarchy's public face and shielded from its political undercurrents. The most telling twist: Camilla's entire office was blindsided. The Duchess's chief advisor reportedly requested access to heirloom transition files weeks after the Queen's funeral, and was told in writing that no such records existed. Behind closed doors, frustration turned to fury. Camilla had expected a full transfer of ceremonial and private pieces, but none came. Instead, she saw Catherine wearing the sapphire clasp to a UN charity event just 8 months later. The message was not spoken. It was worn. And still, one question haunted every royal hallway: did William know? If so, why had he said nothing? Was this a silent alliance between Anne, Catherine, and the future king? Or was William just as stunned, piecing together fragments of his grandmother? Intentions far too late. Some insiders claim William had indeed been told, but not by Anne. By the Queen herself during their final private audience. But without the letter, even William had no authority to act. That authority, it seems, was given to Anne. And Anne alone. As speculation mounts, it is what Anne didn't say publicly but confided in private that adds an eerie weight to the unfolding drama. For decades, Anne has been the monarchy's iron shield, silent, disciplined, loyal, but even iron rusts when exposed to betrayal. What forced the Princess Royal to speak now, after all these years? And why did she choose to go public, against the palace's silent code? The answer lies not in one moment, but in the steady corrosion of trust. Anne, long seen as the guardian of duty above drama, had remained stoic even as the monarchy fractured beneath political pressure and personal rivalries. But the secret promise her mother made, the private instruction to deliver sacred heirlooms to Catherine, was never meant to be politicized. It was meant to be preserved. And yet, the moment Camilla's aides filed a formal request to access the Windsor archives under the pretext of post-coronation item realignment, something inside Anne cracked. According to palace insiders, the request included keywords tied directly to the Queen's private inventory, names of objects that had never once been entered into the public ledger. It was too calculated, too intentional, and Anne knew then that silence was no longer strength, it was surrender. The tension had been building in private, but the moment known now as the Clarion ultimatum changed everything. A private emergency summit was called at Clarence House, where 3 factions clashed over inheritance protocol. The implication was clear: if Anne refused to clarify the whereabouts and legitimacy of the transferred heirlooms, then Catherine's position could be challenged as inappropriate, even deceitful. It wasn't just about jewels, it was about perception. The monarchy's narrative was being rewritten, while the ink of Elizabeth's intentions had barely dried. Anne was given a choice: stay silent and protect her mother's legacy from public scrutiny, or speak now and shield Catherine from being cast as a manipulative opportunist. The weight of it nearly broke her. What made her choice even more painful was the memory of Balmoral, one of the Queen's final lucid days, when she and Anne had walked alone through the East Garden. The Queen had spoken in layered phrases, her voice brittle but unwavering. "It will fall on one who waits, not one who takes," she had said softly. "Give it to the one who carries not the name but the weight." At the time, Anne hadn't understood fully. Now she saw it with piercing clarity. Her mother hadn't been speaking in riddles. She'd been preparing her to face this very moment. For Anne, the monarchy was never about titles. It was about legacy, and legacy, she believed, could not be hoarded by bloodline or hierarchy. It had to be carried with integrity. Catherine, she felt, embodied that endurance in a way that no proclamation could replicate. This wasn't about inheritance, it was about trust. That belief would cost Anne dearly. Camilla, blindsided and furious, allegedly confronted her behind closed doors, accusing her of collusion. But Anne didn't flinch. What rattled the palace more than her words was the fact that William, too, stood by her quietly but without hesitation. He'd read the Queen's letter. He knew, and for the first time in months, Anne wasn't alone. Yet behind every sealed promise lies an object that embodies it, and the heirlooms themselves were more than mere jewellery. They were kept in a private case, away from the crown Wells, stored under Queen Elizabeth's personal instruction. These heirlooms never appeared in public, never loaned, never discussed. Now they're in Catherine's possession, and the palace doesn't know how to explain it. When Catherine stepped onto the steps of St. David's with the wind catching the corner of her coat, the brooch she wore glinted for only a second, but it was enough. That single image sent royal historians, jewellery archivists, and former court reporters into a tailspin. It was the emerald and diamond brooch last seen in 1952, worn by Queen Elizabeth at her first state meeting following the death of her father. The item had not been seen since. No loan records, no museum archives, no royal announcements. Yet here it was, perched silently on Catherine's lapel with no explanation, no comment, no formal reveal. And suddenly the question wasn't just where it came from, but what else might be hidden. Within hours, analysts began tracing images, reviewing Queen Elizabeth's early years for clues, hoping to confirm the impossible. The conclusions were unanimous, it was the same piece. But what stunned investigators more was that the brooch did not belong to the official crown jewel inventory. It had always been kept in a private collection, what insiders now call the unseen vault, reserved for pieces with sentimental or secret lineage. These were not items meant for ceremonies. They were tokens of legacy, quiet symbols of personal pain, triumph, or memory. Why had they emerged now? And why on Catherine? Sources from Balmoral, speaking under strict anonymity, confirmed that a transfer had indeed occurred. Not recently, but years ago during a closed-door visit by Catherine, accompanied only by Anne and 2 vault keepers bound by the Queen's personal code of discretion. No digital trail, no photographs. The only record, allegedly, was in a handwritten low G-book marked Elizabeth personal custody. What was recorded inside that book remains unknown. But the moment Catherine stepped into the public eye wearing that brooch, silence shattered. And those sworn to protect the past found themselves facing questions they had no authority to answer. Camilla's office was the first to react. Within days of the brooch's appearance, a formal request was issued to the Royal Archive Department, demanding an audit of heirloom distributions post-Elizabeth. But the request was halted not by Catherine, not by Anne, but by Prince Edward. As the newly appointed Royal Keeper of Estates, Edward exercised a rare veto authority, citing the late Queen's explicit instruction that certain transfers remain private and exempt from standard review. Camilla's aides were livid, but the directive was final. No review, no audit, no explanation. Catherine, as expected, made no comment. She wore the brooch once more during a visit to a children's hospital, and then never again. But the message had been sent. What made it more haunting was that it wasn't just one piece. Observers began noticing a pattern, subtle accessories never seen before, each quietly traceable to the Queen Mother's private collection or rumoured Victorian holdings believed to be lost. Rings, hairpins, mourning clasps, nothing extravagant, all meaningful, and all now tied to Catherine. Each piece carried a story that no one was ready to tell. A line of lineage not drawn on paper but passed through trust, one silent item at a time. They weren't symbols of power, they were tokens of unspoken succession. And the palace, now gripped by confusion and secrecy, faced an uncomfortable reality. It had no say in what the late Queen had done behind closed doors. These heirlooms, once hidden, now spoke volumes, but they spoke only through Catherine, and the world was listening. And then came the quiet fury. Camilla's circle erupted, demanding explanations that would never arrive. They called it an unjustified seizure, a breach of royal trust, a manipulation of mourning. Camilla's allies, stunned and cornered, launched a silent rebellion within the palace, accusing Catherine of using sentiment as strategy and Anne of betrayal. Behind the polished walls of the monarchy, a war of whispers had erupted into something more volatile. A leaked internal memo from Camilla's private team, never intended to reach the public, used damning words, calculated, covert, and most alarmingly premeditated. It claimed the transfer of Queen Elizabeth's private heirlooms was not only orchestrated behind Camilla's back, but timed to destabilize her growing authority as Queen Consort. The suggestion sent tremors through every corner of the palace. What had started as a quiet emergence of sentimental jewels now felt, to some, like the foundation of a silent coup. Inside the royal trustees' meeting days later, those tremors turned to cracks. What was usually a cold, formal affair turned explosive when a senior member of Camilla's circle lost composure and declared, "This is not an inheritance, it's a hijacking of legacy." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The outburst, witnessed by multiple aides, forced an abrupt adjournment. But the damage was done. It wasn't just a disagreement over jewelry anymore. It was a battle over identity. Who carried the late Queen's will, and who merely wore the crown in her absence. Camilla's attempt to regain footing came in the form of the Clarion Summit, a last-minute assembly of senior royals designed to address procedural misalignments. The subtext was clear: force Anne to account for the private transfer and pressure Catherine into returning what had not been publicly granted. But Anne never showed. Her refusal to attend was interpreted as an outright rejection of Camilla's authority, and behind closed doors it triggered fury. Yet it was William's private remark to his aides that caused the most stir. With resolve and quiet finality, he said, "It's time the truth carried weight. Not power, not titles, truth." The line travelled through the palace like wildfire, and everyone understood what it meant. He was siding with Anne, with Catherine. In the middle of it all, King Charles was reportedly fragile and overwhelmed, struggling with declining health and mounting pressure from all sides. He was said to have begged for reconciliation behind closed doors, urging the women to find unity before the nation notices the fracture. But the fracture was already public. Online forums exploded with speculation. Commentators drew lines between the Queen's quiet legacy and Catherine's steady rise. And Camilla's silence, once a symbol of control, now felt like absence. Her inner circle, once tight and tactical, began splintering under pressure. In desperation, a whisper campaign was launched. Anonymous sources began feeding select members of the press with carefully chosen narratives that Catherine was merely a claimant to sympathy, not a rightful inheritor of royal continuity. They painted her as calculating, opportunistic, and overly sentimental. But the attempt to reshape perception failed to take hold. The public had already seen something else: an unspoken grace, a reverence, a calm weight Catherine carried without fanfare. But while Camilla plotted responses, Catherine's silence began to carry the unmistakable weight of destiny. She never responded. No press statement, no public denial, no subtle acknowledgement. And yet every appearance told a story. A brooch, a bracelet, a locket, each a direct echo of monarch's past. Catherine wasn't claiming the crown, she was embodying the legacy. In a world where silence often speaks louder than declarations, Catherine's restraint became its own form of power. As the noise around her rose, leaks, accusations, speculation she offered no reaction. And yet, her every public appearance carried layers of symbolism. At a diplomatic reception in Edinburgh, she wore a bracelet traced back to Queen Victoria's mourning collection. During a state dinner in Madrid, a discreet pendant from the Queen Mother's wartime collection glimmered beneath her collar. These were not accidental choices. They were quiet affirmations, subtle acknowledgements of a promise fulfilled, not declared. Slowly the public began to notice. And in that noticing, a new phrase took hold across headlines and whispers alike, Elizabeth's echo. The phrase gained traction, not because of spectacle, but because of restraint. Supporters of the monarchy, especially those who had revered the late Queen, began referring to Catherine in reverent terms as the Invisible Queen, a figure who carried the past with such precision and dignity that she seemed to bridge time itself. It wasn't coronets or titles that drew this affection. It was her ability to evoke memory without force, to command attention without sound. In this atmosphere, a previously unseen diary entry from one of the Queen's former aides surfaced, a note scribbled weeks before Elizabeth's passing. It read simply, "She knows, but she waits, as she must." Those within royal circles interpreted it as confirmation that Catherine had been made aware of the heirlooms before the Queen's death, but had chosen to wait until Anne gave her the signal to act. While the public image remained composed, the atmosphere behind closed doors was anything but. Sources close to the family reveal that William, who had remained stoically quiet in public, broke down privately during a tense conversation with Prince Edward. Overwhelmed by the weight of his wife's silence, his aunt's isolation, and his father's growing weakness, he reportedly said, "She carries what none of us could, and it's tearing her apart." That moment marked a turning point not in Catherine's behavior, but in the family's understanding of her role. She was no longer just the wife of a future king. She had become the silent steward of a vanishing past. As attention mounted, so too did concerns about the safety of the heirlooms. The increased media interest sparked fears that certain items might be photographed, replicated, or even tampered with in public archives. Catherine, quietly and without fanfare, submitted a formal request to the Royal Custodian Office, one that would lock the private vaults containing the Queen's most sensitive personal items. The request was approved within hours. No explanation, no announcement, just one more locked door protecting a legacy few were ever meant to see. But even the strongest silence cracks. And it was during a Windsor memorial that everything turned. During the Queen's memorial service at Windsor, a single gesture shattered protocol and electrified the monarchy. Anne publicly stepped aside and gestured to Catherine. In that moment, the unspoken promise of a late sovereign was made real and irreversible. The day had been orchestrated down to the second. Seating charts, ceremonial order, and royal optics, all meticulously planned. But none of it accounted for what Anne would do. As the mourners assembled and the family processed in, all eyes turned toward the center row, where Anne was expected to take her place beside Camilla's standard protocol. Expected, unremarkable. But Anne stopped. Without a word, she looked directly at Catherine and shifted to the right, leaving an open space beside the Queen Consort, which she deliberately said to fill. Instead, she turned toward Catherine, offered a subtle yet commanding gesture, and stepped back. The message was unmistakable. She would not stand next to Camilla, and Catherine, whether she chose to or not, had just been pulled into a symbolic coronation of legacy. The silence in the chapel swelled into a vacuum of disbelief. Catherine, dressed in solemn black, made no move to resist. Her left shoulder shimmered faintly with the mourning pearl pin last seen on Queen Elizabeth at her husband's funeral. For many, the sight was more than a tribute, it was a statement. The press pool, seated 3 rows back, snapped to attention. Was that sanctioned? One reporter whispered, already typing into their phone. Within minutes, headlines began forming mid-ceremony. This wasn't just tradition bending, it was the entire royal gravitational field shifting in real time. But the shock wasn't over. As Catherine stepped forward to fill the space Anne had refused, she was joined without cue by Prince Edward and Princess Beatrice, one on each side. No announcement, no choreography, just quiet movement that shattered decades of protocol. Their alignment with Catherine, in that precise moment, was the final break in the carefully guarded illusion of unity. It was a fracture one that revealed a second hidden monarchy being born in the shadow of the old. From the moment the press noticed Camilla's reaction, the temperature in the chapel dropped. Visibly shaken, lips pursed and fingers trembling, she turned her head once toward Charles, who remained fixed on the altar. Her aides moved quickly. Within moments, she was quietly escorted out, long before the service ended. What followed was an eerie stillness that no hymns could mask. Camilla's exit wasn't planned, and in the court of public opinion, it wasn't dignified. For many watching around the world, it symbolized something far greater than discomfort. It was the collapse of pretense. And in the corner of that solemn cathedral, as the choir filled the air with sacred echoes, William leaned toward Anne and mouthed words that only she seemed to hear. "She knows now." He didn't need to clarify. Catherine knew what the Queen had left for her. And now, so did the world. But what followed in private quarters would mark the final turning point for the monarchy's future. It wasn't meant to be overheard, but it was. A quiet conversation between Charles and Anne, captured unintentionally, would change everything. In it, Charles confesses the truth. "I knew Mother told you, and I knew it was for Catherine." The Windsor Blue Room had long been a sanctuary for private conversations, its doors thick, its windows sealed, its secrets kept. But not that night. A discreet audio security log, designed for archival integrity and normally erased within hours, was flagged by an assistant during routine review. What they heard was not a planning session, not a strategic meeting. It was the emotional unburdening of a king and his sister, exhausted by the weight of legacies, loyalty and lies. In hushed, halting tones, Charles confessed what many had long suspected but never dared confirm. He had known. He had known that Queen Elizabeth had made a private promise to Anne. He had known that the heirlooms were meant for Catherine, and he had said nothing, not to protect Camilla, not to oppose Anne, but to preserve what little unity remained within a monarchy teetering on collapse. Anne's voice in the recording trembled raw, unfiltered, vulnerable. "I feared I betrayed him," she said, referring to their father. "I feared I betrayed everything he taught us about control." For a woman forged in discipline, it was a crack that exposed the unbearable pressure she had been carrying since the day her mother handed her that letter. She had held the secret, obeyed the silence, and watched it spiral into a storm she could no longer contain. And now, hearing Charles admit he had known all along, only deepened the ache. They weren't enemies. They were two children of a sovereign, both trapped by duty, both grieving in different directions. Outside the door, Catherine stood still. She hadn't intended to listen, but once she heard her name, she froze. The words didn't comfort her, they broke her. The confirmation she had long suspected was real. Her tears didn't fall from vindication. They fell from the heartbreak of knowing just how much had been hidden, not from her, but for her. For protection, for timing, for fear of what the truth would do to a monarchy already fraying at the seams. She wiped her tears in silence and turned away, carrying not only the legacy, but now, the sorrow it was wrapped in. Within hours of the leaked audio surfacing, Camilla's advisory team began to fracture. 2 senior aides handed in immediate resignations. Others refused media engagement entirely. What had once been a unified defense now appeared as a hollow fortress crumbling from the inside, abandoned by those who had tried too long to defend the indefensible. And as the public heard Charles's voice admitting the Queen's wishes, the tide turned irrevocably. Social media lit up with support for Anne and Catherine. Hashtags like #The Queen chose her and #Anne knew exploded overnight. Memorials outside Kensington Palace featured candles beside handwritten notes that read, "She never needed a crown, she had the Queen's trust." But even then, one piece remained, the final message Queen Elizabeth had written, never opened, until now. It as tucked inside Anne's priva. To desk. For over a year, an envelope marked "Only when the storm settles." Inside, a note written by the Queen herself, addressed to Catherine, ending with 6 haunting words, You are the heart of it. For 13 months, Anne kept it untouched, sealed, sacred. Even in moments of collapse, when accusations flew, when alliances shifted, when Catherine stood alone with the weight of invisible crowns, Anne never reached for it. She waited. She knew her mother's timing was rarely emotional, it was intentional. And so, when the storm finally calmed, when resignations were filed, when silence returned to the halls not as fear but as peace, Anne opened a drawer, placed the envelope in her palm, and walked toward the woman who had unknowingly waited her entire life for that single message. They sat together, just the two of them. No press, no pomp, no palace ceremony. Anne unfolded the letter with trembling fingers and read aloud. The Queen's handwriting was unmistakable, firm, elegant, resolute. She spoke not as sovereign, but as grandmother, matriarch, woman. Legacy isn't chosen, it is revealed. And you, Catherine, have carried what none could teach. You are not the symbol of it, you are the heart of it. No explanations, no apologies, just truth, quiet, absolute, final. As the last line echoed between them, Catherine's composure finally broke. For the first time since Elizabeth's passing, she cried. Not in silence, not in solitude, but openly, with the full weight of everything she had endured. And Anne, ever the soldier, placed a hand on her shoulder, not as duty, but as devotion. In the doorway, William stood frozen. And then, without a word, he stepped forward, kissed his wife's forehead, and whispered the only words that mattered. Now they know. What followed was not chaos, but clarity. In the days after the letter's existence became known, Camilla vanished from public life. No statements, no scheduled engagements, just absence. Her circle had collapsed, the press had turned, the people had chosen. And while no official declaration was made, the monarchy began moving quietly but unmistakably towards something long overdue. Committees shifted, titles were reviewed, invitations changed tone. Behind the gates of power, the machinery of legacy began reshaping itself, not in defiance of tradition, but in reverence to the truth that Elizabeth had hidden in plain sight. The heirlooms once kept in shadow were now sacred, not for display, not for spectacle, but as living echoes of a queen who knew what was coming and trusted only one to carry it forward. The monarchy no longer needed to defend the decision, it simply moved in step with it. Catherine was no longer the waiting figure on the sidelines. She was the heartbeat that had kept it alive, and she had never asked for it. She had only earned it. And as the storm cleared, one truth remained. Catherine wasn't chosen by circumstance. She was chosen by Elizabeth, in silence, with faith, and without warning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.